Ministry is not for the faint of heart. Maybe you're considering ministry for yourself, whether it's full time or whether it's volunteer. Either way, you're trying to figure out where you fit into the big scheme of things when it comes to church, when it comes to fellowship, when it comes to being a minister of the Word of God. And it's not for the faint of heart. So, this next segment of Living Fully Fit is going to be a spiritual fitness segment. And we're going to be looking at a story from one of my guests here, Chuck Luther, who's been on here before. And we're going to be looking at his journey, his story of why he left ministry in a two-part series of From the Pulpit to Peace, Lessons Learned from Leaving Ministry. Well, welcome to another episode of Living Fully Fit with Coach AJ. And we're doing another segment here on spiritual fitness. And just to really clarify, spiritual fitness for what I do in my content is meant for Christians. So if you don't like the content here and you feel this isn't edifying and reaching out to the lost, that's fine. That's not what this is for. This is to help challenge and sharpen and really help better Christians and the church and make us better, to help us think outside the box, to critically think and all that. But in today's segment, we're looking at I'm titling this is called From the Pulpit to Peace, Lessons Learned from Leaving Ministry. And I have another special guest. We've had him here before on the show, and this is Chuck Luther, a good friend of mine, and we've spent some time in ministry together at a local church here in Harker Heights area. We're going to share our story, but kind of just share the triumphs and pitfalls of church, why we left ministry, because there are certain reasons here. Now, to clarify, this segment isn't about bashing the church or dividing the church or bashing or dividing people. It's really about being transparent, sharing our story, because you can't take away from our story. You might not agree with our story. You might not like our story. That's fine. This isn't for you. But if you want to hear the story and learn from those pitfalls and how you can grow spiritually in your own walk, to have a little more of a critical thinking mind when it comes to church and ministry, maybe you're praying about going to ministry or volunteering in church or whatever it is, these are things to consider as you're doing that. And this is not us to pick and prod every little detail and be mean or divisive. That's not it. But we are going to be transparent. We are going to be real. We are going to say things you might not agree with, and that's okay. So let's get started. So Chuck, welcome again to another episode. Last time we did this, we were doing it virtual.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as that was fun, we did it.
Yeah.
But I think this is going to be a lot more fun in person, kind of feed off each other and whatnot. But let's start off with the first question, is kind of starting with your personal journey. Can you share a little bit about your personal journey into ministry and what inspired you to become a pastor after being in the Army?
Yeah, so I think leadership in the Army, being a senior NCO and moving up, when I got out, I needed belonging, and, God's a defining person in my life, being in my life. And I'd been in ministry before the Army and kind of fell out of it because the Army lifestyle, being a combat arms guy, was just different. I didn't have time to run to chapel. We weren't having Bible studies. We were worried about fighting for our lives in Iraq and preparing. So when I got out and found myself that I had a longing and a need to be involved again with God heavily, I heard God's calling to go back into ministry. All the life lessons I learned of all the numerous years in the Army, God said, I was preparing you on a battleground to be a soldier, but not a soldier for the U.S. Army, but actually for my Army, for my people. And I need you to come back and I need you to take lead. And so I started visiting a local church and, just kind of not wanting to give in. I was like, okay, God, I'm going to have to see 3 forms of ID and I need another confirmation, because it wasn't something I really wanted to do. But I wanted to be obedient, and slowly but surely, as I started going to this local church and things started connecting, God just started speaking louder and louder. And I found myself in the middle of it, not even a conscious decision of like, next week, I'm going to go talk to them about jumping back into full-time ministry.
Yeah.
It was just like I woke up and I'm 6 months into full-time ministry as a staff pastor. That's pretty much how I ended up there.
So definitely a God thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And in those time, how long were you doing that for exactly?
That was about 6 to 9 months from just visiting the church the first time to actually going on staff as a pastor and moving forward.
And you were on staff for how long?
Almost 3 years.
3 years. Okay, cool. So in those 3 years, I'm sure you saw a lot of good things,
Oh yeah.
fulfilling
Yeah.
things. Tell me about those.
Well, we saw people coming to Christ. We saw people breaking from addiction. We saw people that otherwise in the community, because God was neat how He worked it. I had lived in the Fort Cavazos, Fort Hood area since 2003, and so at 2019, when I went to that church, I've been 16 years here. I knew people in the community. I have a very deep root in the community. So the people that I knew from the secular world of the community, I watched them slowly trickle into the doors and watch their lives slowly change. So the good parts of it was that I was watching God do what God does
Mm-hmm.
when people allow God to do what He does and they don't try to step in the middle of it.
That's awesome. And I'm sure in those years, again, as you see good things, you also see things like, that's what we're getting into.
Yes.
We want to hear, we kind of want to start off, the segment with, some positive.
Yep.
I don't believe we should go right into the negative
Right.
and everything, but I think start with positive and go into the not so positive.
Right.
And I think with this, the first question I have really with this, as things shifted, because the topic of this is why I left ministry,
Yep.
at least the full-time aspect of it.
Yep.
When did you first start to feel that some things needed change or things weren't starting to look or feel right?
So the first thing I heard was, or I saw was, we were doing a Halloween event at the founding pastor's house, and I was in charge. So when I came on staff, they gave me everything from operations. I was in charge of every special event, men's ministry, baptisms, new member meetings, all that stuff. Like, I held a lot of stuff, which was fine because I love it. But I was in charge of that in that instance to get bounce houses to the pastor's house from our connexes at the church. So I had a truck, had some people help me load, took it over there. We were putting them up, and I had never messed with bounce houses. Being a 19 Delta in the Army, I never occurred to me really, what do you need for a bounce house? Well, I took the bounce houses over, and as I was unloading, I didn't have stakes for the bounce house. I thought everything was included in the bag, but evidently they weren't. So I was approached as I was unloading fence stakes or fence posts for the parking, to cordon off the parking. I was approached by the senior pastor and asked where the stakes were, and I was like, I don't know. I'll have to get some. And it went from a question of where were the stakes to a full blown cursing out. I watched an individual that stands on a platform that I believe God uses, no matter what the person does to get in the way of, God uses to bring people to Himself. But I watched that person change dramatically, from God's servant to the most narcissistic, toxic, evil, hateful, hurtful person, as he screamed at me, cussed me out, yelled at me, and just basically intimidated and tried to intimidate me and threaten me the whole time. And I just kind of was stunned. I drove out of there to go get steaks because I knew I needed to fix that. And I was actually numb and confused for the first time in my life as a grown man. Like, nothing gets to me after war, but I was like, what just happened? That didn't feel right.
Well, especially coming from someone that you see preach the word of God
Yes.
and have this certain facade,
Yep.
and you see him react to something as trivial as a bounce house,
Yeah.
which is like, it's a bounce house,
Yeah.
and it's an honest mistake,
Yeah.
and it's a mistake that you probably weren't aware of because, again, you weren't told, hey, there's also stakes in here, go find them
Right.
beforehand.
Right.
It's like they're assuming that you should just know this.
Right.
And it's like, for me, as well in the Army, I'm not going to assume a private knows everything. I'm going to give them the task, but tell them, hey, here's how it is. That way it's easy for them to understand because they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
In your case, it's not like you're a private. You just didn't know what you didn't know.
Right.
You knew, hey, there's balance houses here, but you didn't know all the other, I guess, pieces that went with that. And I know, like, that must have probably rocked your world a little bit.
It did.
It probably just shook you up, like, where did this come from?
Yeah, I started asking God, okay, God, did I hear something wrong? Is this where you want me? And the crazy thing is I thought about it, there were 9 hours before the event was to kick off. So in my mind, I was thinking, okay, so we made a mistake. So we have 9 hours to correct the mistake and we can fix it. And what you just said in the Army, I mean, if I would have been asked, how do we conduct a TCP, snap checkpoint and, all these other things, if you asked me in the world that I lived, I could have rattled them off and we'd have been perfect.
Yeah.
But what I didn't see was there was no grace, there was no compassion, there was no nurturing, no mentoring, all the things that Jesus stands for. There was none of that.
from a senior pastor.
Yes.
A person who's supposed to shepherd people.
Right.
That's the thing that drives me nuts about that. I remember an experience I had kind of similar. It wasn't the yelling and screaming. It was actually, I had taken this this job at this church over in Houston right after I left this church in Pennsylvania. My wife at the time and we hadn't had a date night forever.
Mm-hmm.
And we're on our way on New Year's Eve to go drop off my daughter. She was a baby, to her grandparents and go have a date night. I haven't had one in years because I was just so enamored by ministry.
Right.
And we're on our way to drive from where we were in Crosby, Texas to the Woodlands, which is about maybe a 45-minute drive. And we're about halfway there. My pastor calls me. He's like, "Hey, where are you?" I'm like, "What do you mean, where am I?" It's like, we have a date night. It's Friday night. He's like, "Well, we have everybody here, all hands on deck at this fireworks stand." And I'm like, "Well, I didn't know anything about that. What do you want me to do about this, pastor?" And he's like, "Well, you're a pastor here. You should be here. We need everybody. We need everybody's help. And all the other pastors are here. Where are you at?" I'm like, "Okay." So I had just taken this job, and that was like the first red flag to me.
Wow.
My wife is like, we can't have you lose your job. Let's just turn around." So we turned around. I picked up, I think, Panda Express for dinner, and I dropped her and my daughter off back at our apartment. I get to the fireworks stand. They had so many volunteers. They didn't need me there.
Yep.
I was in the way because there were so many volunteers. Yep. And I looked at my pastor. I said, "Pastor, what do you need me to do?" "Oh, just find a place."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
And then, of course, that night I found out that I missed my daughter's first crawling steps.
Wow.
I missed her first crawl, and I was devastated.
Yep.
And that was like, what the heck? My world's rocked, and I had just started that position. Yeah. And how long into that position were you when that happened?
About 4 or 5 months.
No, so yeah. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're just like, okay, well, maybe this is just this one instance. Maybe it's just
a
one-off, He had a bad day. That's what I thought. Like, well, maybe he thought this was more big of a deal. I gave him some grace. Well, a lot more than he gave me.
Yep.
And I wish I would have went with my gut back then.
Yep.
And I'm sure you probably wish, man, if I knew what I know now,
yeah.
Went with my gut back then, probably things would have been different.
Yeah.
So after that, what happened next? Like, what are the things that you started seeing, like steps and kind of the downhill slope of stuff?
Well, it's what you just said. It's so funny from a psychological standpoint. It's like an abusive relationship where a wife is hit or screamed at or intimidated. It becomes reactionary. But then what happens is that wife, the person that was injured, the harmless party, is the one that starts making excuses, thinking, "Oh, well, he just had a bad day. I don't know what happened to him that day. He just reacted, and I just need to let it go." But then when it becomes, when you do things once, it's an accident. When you do it multiple times, it becomes a pattern. And so I started witnessing this pattern. I watched it with other people. I watched it with the executive pastor who actually has known this pastor since they were teenagers. This executive pastor's in his mid-20s. It's the only job he's ever had other than some missionary work. And so he has a very lucrative salary. He's given a Tesla by the church. So he lets a lot of stuff go. But I watched this young man work 20-hour days, wife in the hospital, in a psychological hospital, kids getting bounced between people taking care of them. And he's at the church at 4:00 in the morning writing proposals for a new bank loan for new properties. And so what I started there was the pattern was I watched the behaviors with him. I got involved in group text, hearing some of the stuff and the tones that were coming out. And I actually approached it, being an older person than that pastor, being an elder to him. I chose to try to take the leadership guide and go, "Hey, pastor, I want to talk to you a little bit. I mean, I know you're under a lot of stress and all that, but this, and this," and that was not the right thing to do.
So it wasn't received?
No, it was not. I was told, didn't care about the age that I had, that he was the boss. I'm the boss here. And he said, "Unfortunately, I can't be your boss, your pastor, and your friend. So you're going to have to pick what I am in your life."
Wow.
So he gave me the ultimatum that and I said, "Actually, I think you're wrong in that. Even though you're my boss, because I work for the church, you're still my pastor. And as a pastor, which is Greek for shepherd, I've never witnessed a good shepherd, which is the standard of shepherding. Not bad. There's no bad shepherds that are okay. You don't go, 'Oh, he's just a bad shepherd.' No, you get rid of that shepherd. Good shepherds are the standard, and the standard is you've never seen a shepherd go out in the field because a sheep wouldn't listen to him and throw them and kick them and scream at them and expect them to listen any more or less."
No.
So the patterns were there, and then watching the other location pastors, how he would blow up over a grammatical error in a sermon note. But it was just, I was starting to go, wait, what is going on here? Like I couldn't understand what was happening, but I thought I can change him. I need to stay here, and I took that
Like
fear
every
of,
other
yeah,
abusive
yeah,
relationship.
yeah. I'll be the person, or I'll be the buffer. Actually, the funny thing is, all the staff there knew that Chuck was the buffer between them and that pastor. I was the guy that got in the middle. I was the guy that could stand up and would stand up and go, "Hey, that's not okay." Other people would not, because they were. I'm not going to say they were not strong enough, but they just didn't. They didn't go that way. I was willing to take the verbal abuse if it meant letting them be relieved, because I watched them being abused.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think that like your experience as in leadership in the Army helped with that a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Because we had toxic. I mean, let's just go back. This isn't just about the church. This isn't about beating up on a pastor. This is about highlighting realities of what is. And in the Army, I saw lots of toxic leaders. Unfortunately, I shamefully will admit, I was a toxic leader at one point. When I got rank at a young age, it went to my head, and I would scream and yell. And then I realized, why don't people respond to me? And then one day it hit me like, wow, because you manage by fear and not out of respect. So you need to learn how to lead these people out of respect and not fear. And that
Well,
changed.
fear gets a reaction. It's not the reaction we want, though.
Yep.
I think it gets a temporary reaction of, I'll obey because I don't want to lose my job or I don't want to get in trouble. But after a while, fear creates more of a wedge than it does anything. It doesn't get things done. It gets things done temporarily.
Yep.
It'll get things done,
Yep.
but not to the degree or quality that it could get done with respect versus fear.
Exactly.
It's unfortunate that I see this so often, and not just in ministry, but any kind of leadership role. I think this is great for leaders as a whole to listen to. It's like, hey, pay attention to how you talk to people, how you treat people, because if they're reacting out of fear, that should tell you something about yourself.
Yep.
And not about them. Well, it's them. They're just weak, whatever it is, whatever mindset you have. Right. Or maybe it's just you that they are afraid of you because the way you talk to them, the way you treat them, the way you interact, the way you lead.
Yep.
So circling back here, so you had some experiences, and obviously you saw a lot. Even though I know me and Jess, I started going to that church a little bit before COVID. So I was attending there in person, and then COVID hit, and I was watching online like everybody else was. Yep. And then, of course, I got deployed during COVID. I went to Africa, and I'd watch online still. And then I started going in person more whenever I got back from my deployment. And I enjoyed it. I love the, very real preaching, because I'll say this guy is a great speaker.
Yes.
He's a very charismatic auditor.
Yep.
Which is great. You need to have that as a preacher, as a pastor. You should be able to speak well, right, and eloquently, and be able to bring a good word. And he does do that, yep, which I'm not going to take that from him. Right. He speaks a good word. But I think where I started seeing is that he would start slowly injecting little things that I was like, what's that about? And I noticed like he would start injecting a little bit more politics, a little more this, and then I noticed it more when I started becoming a member. I went to the membership class and everything, and I started seeing it more as I got more involved of kind of how things were handled in the church. With him, I noticed that he pretended to be kind of, I don't know what's going on, I'm just oblivious, but he wasn't, because I started seeing staff members kind of slowly leave the church. One of the Belton campus pastors up and left out of the blue during Easter. Yep. I didn't like that guy. I love his preaching style. Yep. The guy was very friendly, very personable person. Yes. Yeah, he was. I really liked him. And when he disappeared, I remember my fiance and I were like, me and Jess were like, what happened to that guy? He was here and he's gone. And all these other people that were attached to him left too. Yep. And then another worship leader at the campus left as well. And then all these things. And then, of course, my little incident with, some of the staff, happened, and then whirlwind. And I started seeing more and more and more, and I'm like, okay, this isn't right. Especially after my first real conversation with the man. I actually, tried to do the right thing before I started considering leaving the church, and I actually called him. We had a phone call that led to nothing, because all the phone call was him, one, talking over me, two, blaming it back on me, pushing it back on me, took no ownership of his staff or himself,
Yep.
and just, no, it's you.
Yep.
But here's this. Here's how we could schmooze you a little bit. And I was like, okay, this isn't going anywhere. And then after that, we had prayed about it. After I went to Korea, it was like, you know what? This is a good time for me to kind of pray and think about where I want to go when I get back. Right. And it's sad because I didn't see those things. I remember Jess saw a lot more because she has a big discerning spirit, and she was like, I like this pastor, but some of the things he does and says reminds me of my old boss. And she's like, my old boss was a big narcissist. And I was like, really? I said, yeah, he's an aggressive guy. He's dude's dude, and he likes Jesus. Like, Rah. Yeah. And at first, it's a very attractive thing, especially to a soldier. Yeah. I can see why a lot of male soldiers like this guy because he's like, But if you go into the depths of it and you really get to know the person, you're like, whoa, this doesn't feel right. And I think for you, as you and I have had built relationship, especially after the whole shenanigans a year and a half ago. Yeah. That's where you and I started our relationship from that point, which we can get into later. I remember just watching you do your thing versus him, and I'm like, there's a big contrast here because you were way more integrated in the culture of the church and involved with the people. And he would just kind of show up, do his thing, and kind of disappear in the green room. Yep. Maybe pop up at the front of the office to kind of high-five people here and there, but disappear again. Yep. And I just saw him more as a celebrity kind of personality. Which
figurehead.
Yeah, figurehead, which I experienced in my last church. And one of the reasons why I left the ministry. Yep. There's a lot of variety of reasons why I left ministry, but that was one big is the pastor had no accountability. He was this figurehead celebrity person, and that doesn't do anybody any good.
Nope.
But here's the big thing I want to ask is, what was kind of the big turning point for you? Because obviously these little small things build up, and then eventually you're like, okay, God, I need some kind of answer here because I don't want to leave, but I know I need to. And obviously there had been kind of icing on the cake, cherry on the top that made you like, okay, enough is enough.
Yep. It was so it started coming to a head the spring of 2023 last year when I came into work one morning and the pastor was there, and he's like, "Hey, I need you to be here in a little while. We're gonna have a meeting with a donor that's gonna donate for the playground for the school." And I was like, "Playground for the school?" And he goes, "Yeah, we have a donor that's gonna donate $150,000 or whatever it was. And we need you here because you're going to be my ops guy. You're going to oversee all the contractors and blah, blah." I was like, okay, can we talk? Where did we just decide to do a playground? And retro back to that, the school that we have, I found out about the school in a Sunday morning service sitting in the pastor's row as he announced that we were going to have an interest meeting next week for a private school that the church was going to start. And now I was the executive, the associate pastor to this founding pastor. And you would ask that pastor, he would say it from the platform. Chuck runs this place. I just preach, and pretty much that's the true statement. Like, I did run the place, and that's fine. I did what you said. I tried to stay out with the people. I tried to do what I believed God would call us to do as a pastor, as a shepherd, is to be with the flock. You cannot lead. You cannot shepherd from the porch.
No.
And look down in the field and hope things work out. So the icing on the cake was we had went back and forth with this donor on what we were wanting to do and what this pastor wanted us to do. And I got all the plans together, and then this pastor was gone, which he typically would be gone to New Mexico. He'd go to Colorado. He'd go to Kentucky. It's weird. So we see that there's patterns of these types of pastors that they usually run in packs of 6 to 8. And what they do is they round robin all year, and they go talk at each other's churches and get like $10,000, $20,000 to speak. And so when they say the church doesn't pay me much money, that might be true, but they make a lot of money. And it's tax free because they're a pastor. And so there's that. So they do that, and they sell the books. And even if they don't sell the books, the church that they're visiting buys the books and throws them in the room or whatever. We had tons of books from other people. When I got there were people that had been there to speak 4 or 5 years before I got there, and we had like cases of their books. And I'm like, what are we supposed to do with these? And these are people that he had fallen out of friendship with now. He said, we don't talk to that person anymore. I'm like, okay, so what do we do? So the icing on the cake was we figured out what we're going to do. He was traveling. I was communicating with him on what he wanted. It was over connexes. The last that I have from him is that we're going to do 2 connexes on the concrete, blah, blah, blah. We're going to make it like a play yard. It's going to be storage. We might actually do a snack bar out there at some point. So I'm like, cool. We got the connexes. We got them ordered, got them in. And then like 3 weeks later, he's finally back at church. He's going to preach. Because the funny story is he was back at church to give an update on the capital campaign that had launched almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and they had an X amount of dollars they wanted to raise. Well, they raised that, but they were still pushing to raise more because we kept developing more things that were coming out of that capital campaign that were not originally told to church members of what we were going to do. We were spending money to create schools and put playgrounds in place, and people had given that money because they wanted to build the sanctuary bigger. They wanted to do something different.
Yeah.
So long story short, we're sitting in a service. It was a Sunday morning. I always got to church around 6 a.m. The pastor would show up around 7:30, 8 to get ready for the early morning service. And the first service went off without a hitch. It was actually a really good service. Worship went well. I always call it the production. The production went well. We did our job. It was like a mini Elevation Church concert. We got everybody in their fields. Everybody's pumped. Everything's good. The message was actually really good, as you said. He's a great speaker, very charismatic. Like he could preach to you the ingredients of pasta and make you really interested in it. And then you realize, well, I don't even like pasta. But then we go in right before the 9:30. We're in the green room because that's where we were treated to. I tried to stay out in the commons, but I was always told, come to the green room. We stay in the guest suite for about 10 minutes to greet everybody leaving. And then we go to the guest suite, and we stay until service starts. And I'm like, I never heard of Jesus excluding himself from the people ever. It was he always included himself with the people. And so I thought, okay, well, we're back there and, we're talking. How's this going? How's that going? Making small talk. And then it came up. It was me, the senior pastor, founding pastor, the executive pastor, and then the pastor's nephew, who was all over production, all the videography and all that stuff. We were all in the guest suite or the green room, and the pastor says to me, so what about the third connex? And I said, what third connex? I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, the third connex and he started using some curse words at me, and he got louder and louder and started slamming his hand on the. I said, Pastor, you didn't tell me about a third connex. He's like, so you didn't buy it? I was like, no, I didn't, but I can adjust the budget. I actually have money left over in the budget. So, I mean, we can do that. And he just lost it. And I had the F word dropped at me, screaming and yelling at me, throwing his phone down on the desk, pounding it, telling me that I was a second away from being fired. So he's threatening me with my job. And all I said was, at that point, something clicked in me. I was like, I'd been praying for about 6 months. God, release me from this church. And every time God would say no. And I'm like, why? And God didn't give me an explanation. And I look back on it now, it wasn't that he left me. God was shielding me of understanding that it wasn't for me to understand. It was for me to continue to serve. So at that point, I said, okay, I took a breath and I was like, God, is this the sign? And it clicked. And I was like, yep. So I started putting my laptop and stuff back in my bag. And I was told by this pastor, you need to go take a walk around the building and find out if this is what you want to do or whatever. And all I said, no, I don't need to take a walk. Maybe you need to take a walk. I put my stuff in my bag and I walked out of that room to go put it in my truck to come back in. I needed to get separation because I knew what I wanted to say was not what I needed to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was like, let me get away. And what's weird is about 6 weeks after I resigned from the church, which was a couple weeks later from that point, a video surfaced from the surveillance system in the church. It was sent to me by email. And I was like, what is this? And the person said, just don't tell them where you got it from because I'll lose my job. So it was a staff member. And they said, you just need this because people need to know. And I was like, I don't even know what to do with this. But evidently they sent it to a former church member. So the very next morning I started getting blown up. That former church member who left on really bad terms didn't really care about any repercussions, posted that video on a bunch of
I remember seeing that
pages, and everybody's asking me about the video. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I get this long drawn out letter, and all this. It just ended up weird. Like I started getting accused that I was going to be prosecuted legally, that I illegally downloaded stuff off servers and this and that. And I had to get a lawyer involved in that because I was like, I got to protect myself. So that was the time as I drove out that day. I hadn't resigned at that point, but as I drove home that day, I was praying to God driving, going, God, you've got to help me because what I want to do is not what I need to do. I have fought hard to remove myself from that military reactive lifestyle. I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
And God said, pray again and ask me. And I was like, ask you what? What have you been asking me? Okay, God, release me from this church. And he said, you're released. And that was it. At that point, he said, go ahead and prepare, let them know, and just wait for me to tell you where to go.
And for clarification, you resigned.
Yes, was not fired. I was not. I know that rumor's been going around. I have a resignation letter still that I emailed to make sure that it was on documents.
And was there a response to that resignation letter?
Oh, yeah. I was told that I was in violation of pastoral, whatever it is he called it, that I did not have a formal meeting with all of them. And the funny thing is, I tried to ask for a meeting with him. When I called him, he finally answered. He said, what do you need? I said, we really need to talk. I have something really important to talk to you about, and it's got to be done. He's like, I'm on my way to the airport. I'm going to New Mexico. I don't have time right now. I said, it can't wait. And he goes, it's going to have to. He hung up on me. And I was like, okay. So then I went to the executive pastor, and I was told by him, this is not something that I need to be involved with. You need to talk to a pastor about it. I said, I've tried. So from there, I went to the location pastor for our other location down south, who was the head of all HR, which I thought, well, that's a pretty good fit. Couldn't get a hold of him. And then I reached out to the last location pastor at the other location, and that pastor, who's probably one of the scaredest people I've ever met, was like, I'm not getting involved in this. So it left me with reaching out to the elders. The elders told me, this is something you need to talk to the pastor about it. Again, they kept sending me back to this pastor who told me I don't have time and hung up on me.
Wow.
So at that point, I knew God had released me. So there had to be notification made. So I sent an email to the elders, to all three location pastors, the founding pastor and the executive pastor, about that it was with a broken heart that I felt that it was time for me to leave. It was not instantaneously. I had offered to work as long as they needed me to fill the positions because I didn't want to put the church in a hurt position. And I sent it, and it took all of about an hour to get a response. And response was what I figured it was going to be. It was vile. It was threatening. It was just ugly. It was just, you're such a failure. You've blown up every good relationship for the last 2 years that you've developed. All these people invested in you. You're in violation of the Matthew 18 principle. You've harbored offense against me. So now you're at fault. So it all became the blame game.
It's not us, it's you.
Yeah. It was all me, and it was wrong for them. And
you can't quit, you're fired.
That's pretty much where it came to. And then I found out 2 days later, I got a video sent to me from the next service. I know a lot of people still go there, and they videoed it's the circle in the morning before the first service they have with all the serve team leaders and the leaders of the church. Well, that pastor came out and wanted to put it out there and say that I was no longer with the church, and it was due to my fault, and that I was wrong, that I violated biblical principles, and that for that they had to terminate me because of my behavior. And so that had to get corrected a couple times about, no, I didn't get fired. Yeah. So.
Well, what's funny is, everybody has their perspective, vantage point, but the thing is, with that kind of stuff, there has to be proof.
Yeah.
And when people hear rumors, it's like, well, have you just asked Chuck? And they're like, well, we don't have to ask him. I'm like, well, because we've had a few friends, like, just assume, like, for instance, like, our partnership with a lot of our collaboration and conversations, all people's assumption is because, well, Chuck left, Chuck got fired, and he's bitter and angry, and AJ is just, feeding off of that. And it's just, he's a bad influence. Like, I'm not influenced by anybody, honestly. I think we're just aligned. There's a difference between being influenced and aligned. And I think the reason why we have an alignment, because I've been where you've been before, and like, honestly, this recent, stuff with this church, really, it just kind of further exasperated what was already there. That had healed, like, here's the thing is, I told Jess this, I'm not bitter either.
Right.
I'm not angry. I'm not even hurt. I'm disappointed.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at. I'm disappointed. And what does anger me is when I see people who can't let people lead with grace. What I've noticed is that since she and I have left and we share our opinions and everything, people automatically assume everything that I post, everything that I say is about them.
Yep.
And yeah, what? I'll admit some of it is inspired.
Yeah.
But not everything is directed.
Yeah.
It's part of it is part of my own story, and what part of it's integrated with that story recently.
Yeah.
And that's okay because it's my story. It's like your story is your story.
Yep.
And what got you to the story is what happened.
Right.
Again, your story, your perspective. I bet there's, that old saying, there's three sides to every story.
Yep.
Your story, your side, the other person's side, and the truth somewhere in the middle.
Yep.
And the thing is, no one on that side is willing to actually show their receipts of their story.
Right.
But we don't need to. Like, well, if you're so adamant this is what happened, then show it.
Yep.
Because you have that. Yep. Where's the other side? That's where I like to hear the truth, and no one. The over defensiveness of this side is what concerns me.
Mm-hmm.
Every time they get over defensive of that personality of that one senior pastor, I'm like, why? Yeah. Is it blind faith in a person? That's just scary, That's why, I don't like throwing that word cult loosely around, but it's cult-like behavior. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that churches or the people are, but the behavior is similar too. Yeah. And that's what's kind of scary. So moving on here, we're talking about challenges and turning points. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced serving besides some of the stories you shared? You shared the stories of the staff. Did you see some of the other staff kind of struggle as well as you have? Because, obviously you've seen a lot of people come and go. I've seen them come and go. Yeah. But you being in the staff, were some other staff that are still there, did you see them kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? But makes me wonder why they're still there, because if they see what you saw, did you see that in them too, like that kind of like unease?
I did. There's one of them, as a matter of fact, one of the staff pastors that we just had to deal with just recently. When I got there, young man, I became his mentor. I was his first report, and I was actually given a directive by the senior pastor, the founder pastor, to mentor him in the youth ministry world, because I had experience and he was in it. And, so we want to do some things. And, they were all scared of the pastor. Now, this one, he would stand up to him, but this legitimately, when he stood up to the pastor finally, got a phone call by the executive pastor and the senior pastor, I guess, right after it happened one evening. And I was told to get involved and to get a hold of him because he was 2 days away from being fired. And so, I reached out and said, hey, what's going on? So kind of pulled it together. And I know why, like this person and a lot of other staff people stay there, because most of them, they don't have, like this young man, he has no other life skills. He gets a pretty good salary from a church because, I know what they pay. And so why would you change at 20-something years old? You've never had a job. You didn't even graduate with a worthwhile degree in anything. So you have nothing. What are you going to do in your mid-20s and start off now, especially in the world we live in?
Yeah.
And so, it's funny. It's that the love of money is what actually creates the issue. It's not money. Money's great. If money's so evil, then why do churches ask for 10% of it every Sunday? I'm just, it's so funny. Pastors say that, but then they're like, but give me 10% of that bad money. I don't understand. So
yeah,
I think it's the love of the money. And so I think it's kind of the corruption of it. It allows us to really say what we will and won't accept.
Yeah.
And so I think that person and the other staff members, and then the other ones, it's like that bad relationship. They have been beat down so much. They're fearful that if I leave this ministry job, one, I'll never be able to work in ministry again because I'll be labeled.
Yeah.
That's a big false fear that people in ministry need to understand. That's not the case. Secondly, look at Paul. How many times was Paul beat up and pushed around? Because he was in ministry. I had a discussion the other day with another scholar that I go to school with. And he said, well, Paul wasn't a pastor. He wasn't in ministry. I said, he absolutely was. Have you not read? We studied this stuff. And he was like, yeah, well, he was, I like what he said. He said, well, he was God directed. And I was like, well, I hope that every pastor and every minister is God directed.
I would hope so, at least.
And he just kind of looked at me. I said, you see where I'm getting at? So like Paul, Paul was very obedient to God, even though he knew the risks that he risked and the things that he was going to do. And he knew that if it's God's divine call for me to be in ministry, I'm going to be in ministry. And maybe God's trying to call me out of ministry to do something different. The funny thing is, we say ministry, we think it's the walls of a building that call themselves a church that have a nonprofit status.
Yeah.
That is not only where ministry lives.
But that's where I think a lot of people see. They honestly identify with that.
Yeah.
They don't see it outside of that, because that's where we, in the Western church especially, that's all we know and see, unfortunately.
Well, you're somebody that you're friends with and that you know and you follow, and I do too, Jeff Cochran. I love how he said it one time. He said, if you're getting ready to get into pastoring, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, who have you pastored? And some people go, well, I've never pastored. No, you've led people. You've cared for people. You've ministered to people. So who have you done it? And if you can't call a list of people, then you need to pray really hard that it's God asking you to go, because God won't put you into something unprepared.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: is pastor means shepherd. We talked about this just earlier. Who are you shepherding? Who are you wrangling in? Who are you mentoring? Yeah. It's like in the Army. Yeah. We promote based off potential. Yep. Who are you leading? Well, I'm a specialist. Doesn't matter. Are you leading someone? You're always leading. Right. I told my class about this back in Korea, and I was telling my soldiers, everyone here is a leader. Mm-hmm. PFC so-and-so, you're a leader. Yep. It's about influence. Mm-hmm. Leadership is influence. Yep. Leadership isn't just the title. A title is good. Yeah. It helps give a little more potency to it. Right. But in all reality, I know a lot of people who have rank and position who are terrible at leadership. Yes. Who can't lead themselves out of a cardboard box. Yep. But the position, you still respect the position. You look at those kind of things like that. But I look at, leadership. True leadership is, am I influencing people in a direction that improves their life, betters them, that challenges them, and that propels them to be a leader as well. Right. When you're hoarding leadership, or you're creating your own, criteria for leadership that isn't biblical, especially in the confines of the church, this is what a leader looks like. Well, where's that from? Well, it's just the way this is our culture.
The 9 books I read last month.
Exactly.
From non-Christian believers.
Exactly. Well, how about what does the Bible say leadership should be? Yep. What does the Bible say that an elder or a deacon or a pastor or a bishop should be? Right. It's not the way we've created it. We create this corporate version of church and leadership, but it's not this, cookie cut thing. And every culture, every community in churches has a different culture. Yep. I had the conversation with this pastor a while back before we left, and I said, hey, I have a heart for the military because I am in the military. Mm-hmm. I notice we don't do anything for the military in this church. And he's like, well, yeah, AJ, you're right. Yeah, we need to do something. I said, I'd be glad to help head that up and do something for our communities. We don't have any outreach for military families. Because when I went to Korea, the coolest thing, I was involved in the chapel, helped lead worship at the chapel there. The chapel had a ministry where they would go bring meals to new families who are PCSing there in Camp Humphreys. That's outreach. That's great. That's how you get the community involved. Yep. That church in Harker Heights would not exist if it wasn't for the military. Right. That's just honest. Yeah. Every business in this area would not exist the way it does, or thrive the way it does. It might exist, maybe, who knows, but at least thrive the way it does if it wasn't for the military presence here. Yep. The reason why Killeen, Harker Heights, Copperas Cove, Central Texas really is thriving is because of the military presence. Yep. Military brings business here. Oh yeah. Brings money, brings, people. Yep. And if you don't help really funnel into that community, then you're missing a market of people that you can really reach and impact and change their lives. Right. And it was sad because my conversation with him went nowhere, obviously, because that's not his priority. Yep. His priority is other things, school, their university they have. Oh, yeah. Don't get me started on that. Yeah. That's something else. That's another conversation. Yes. That's
podcast 27. Right?
Yeah. But you look at that, it's like, well, that's not our priority. Look at your community. Like, I look at churches, what churches need to do, and this is a lesson I learned, is what is your community dealing with in that local culture? Obviously, if it's military, it means there's absent dads because they're deployed. Yes. Yep. Or absent moms because they're deployed. Yep. how can we outreach these families who their families are deployed? Let's do that. Or what's a need here? Obviously, a need in Killeen, there is a lot of drugs here. There's a lot of poverty in Killeen. There's a lot of that stuff here that we can reach out to and really help, improve our community and do real outreach.
Right.
But you don't see that. It's like, well, we need a Christian school, a university. We need to have this men's breakfast, this women's event where we just get to take pictures and look pretty.
Yes.
And might do a little worship, might do a little message, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was a youth pastor, I was always in trouble as a youth pastor. I'll be honest. I got in trouble a lot. And the reason why I got in trouble a lot is because I was so darn countercultural. Yeah. I was the person who, me and the pastor a lot of times did not see eye to eye because I would question everything. Like, well, the Bible doesn't say we should be doing this. Yeah. And I remember we did an event where we went out to the community and we served the community for free. And my pastor said, well, why don't you hand out cards with our church information on it? I said, well, pastor, that wasn't the intent of the event. The intent of this event was to get our kids to serve because we're getting ready for a mission trip. Okay. And we're going to a mission camp over in Durango, Colorado. And I said to my youth kids, if you cannot serve in a local mission in our community, you have no business going to a mission trip.
Absolutely.
And that was part of the prerequisite to go on this mission camp was they had to serve locally. And we served. We didn't hand out pamphlets with our church information and invite them to church. We just, gave them free water. We have this one station where we gave free water bottles. We taped a Bible verse on there. That's it. Just, it was, the verse about, living waters. Yep. And we just posted on the sticker and just hand them away. Well, what church are y'all from? Oh, don't worry about that. Just God bless you, Yeah. And granted, we had our youth shirts on, so you can probably tell where we're from, but we weren't actively just inviting people to church. We just want to bless people.
You were showing that wasn't the motivation.
Exactly. There wasn't like some ulterior motive to what we were doing. It was just, we wanted to serve. Yeah. And we were going to local businesses. Hey, can we wash our windows? Like, well, how much? Like, free. Yeah. They're all confused. Yeah. And again, I remember my pastor the next day, he was like, well, this was a missed opportunity. I'm like, no, it wasn't. We served people like Jesus would serve them. Jesus didn't have an ulterior motive when he served people. He was like, okay, I'm going to heal you, but remember that I healed you. And there's an offering plate that Judas is holding. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jesus didn't do that.
What about if they didn't feel like the healing took? So could they get their money back from?
All right. Okay. We went over that last podcast with Caitlin, and because that was what struck her was that this church was doing.
I've never heard a holy money back guarantee. Never heard of it.
Not biblical?
No.
If you can find it in the Bible?
Yeah. Somebody please help me.
Please. If you give this amount of money and you're not blessed, God's okay with you taking your money back.
So I got to tell you, I asked the dean of our school at Dallas Theological about that. I took the pamphlet. I was like, hey, I just want to make sure because I'm arrogant and I'm like that sometimes. I just want to know. Because evidently I'm bitter and I hurt, and maybe I'm deluded. Help me understand. I gave them the pamphlet. He called one of the other professors over from the other lecture hall. They sat and looked at it. The professor looked at me and slid it back to me. He said, "I'm not even going to try to address that." He said that. And I said, so he's been a theological professor and scholar for 57 years. He's taught the word, and I was like, so there's nowhere in there, and he said. That there is nothing biblical about that document. Just because you throw some scriptures on it does not make it biblical. And he said the problem we find in the world, especially the Western church, is that we believe that it's biblical because it came from the Bible. Well, I can take 10 verses in the Bible and make Jesus the worst man in the world, right? And then I can also jump in with all those people that say that the Bible contradicts itself. Yeah. The Bible doesn't contradict itself when you take it for the substance of what it's being said. If you read it word for word and then try to connect it together with our ignorance of the Western culture that we're in, it contradicts it. But everything does. The Constitution does, news does, everything does. Yeah. So just back to that point, we had a professor at the major theologicals. Well, wait, let me just go ahead and say that I do know that evidently seminary is where the Bible goes to die. Is what I was told.
I've heard that multiple times from this one pastor. He actually called out one of the members of the church, and he left the church too recently. Yep. And because he's going to theology school. And
funny story about that person. I actually got chastised. I was a pastor still at the church. That member had reached out and asked two different pastors. He needed a pastoral endorsement in order to get into that theological seminary. Neither one of them would do it. He reached out to me, and I was like, dude, brother, I would love to do that because I've known this man. I've walked with him. I've watched him and his family. We went through several discipleship courses together. I said it would be an honor. So I wrote it for him. And then when they found out that I wrote it, I was told I was never to write anything for any member again. But yeah, I was a pastor.
What's the point of the title then if you can't help people out?
I guess so that you can fill in whenever they don't make it to service. There's that.
Okay. There's that.
I digress. I'm sorry.
So with that, next question I have here. How did the people and your colleagues react to your decision to step down? That's the big one. Cause I know for me, it was mixed.
Yeah.
I had people who left the church.
Yep.
And I had people who just were like, what the heck? And many churches I've left. When I've left peacefully, I've left churches not so peacefully.
Yeah.
I've left churches in good terms. I've left churches in not so bad terms. And, I've noticed it's something that's mixed. Yeah. And in your experience, what happened when you, and also your wife, because both of y'all left as a family,
yep.
Because, you're united, you're one.
Yep.
And what happened with the people that you were close with, the people that you thought were spiritual family?
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
So it's funny. There were a lot of people, and it really hurt me. I think the only hurt that I have from this whole ordeal that I'm being accused of being hurt is the people that you thought you knew, you didn't know. And then I get it. So I had a lot of people. It was actually probably 60-40, I would say. 60% people are like, they were upset. They're going to leave the church. They want to know, where are you going to go? His first question out of most of them, 80% of them was, where are you going? Where are you going to be working? We're going to come there. We love you. And I'm like, hey, so I don't know where I'm going to go, but even if I did know, do not leave the church for me. Don't follow a man.
Yeah.
Follow God. So if you pray really hard and God says it's time for you to go, and this was a confirmation for you, then keep praying where God would lead you to. If you pray and God says no, stay, then stay. I said, because I promise you, others in that church need you. And you need to stay there. And I said, that church is a great church. It is God's house. Unfortunately, it just has somebody, it's like an Airbnb. It's not the homeowner that's running it in the ground, but it's okay. Eventually the homeowner will take control of it again.
No, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah. So they'll get back in there, they'll patch it up, and they'll be better than ever. So it was the mix. And then some that said, oh, we love you, we miss you. The first couple of weeks, here it is a year later, are the ones that are actually on my page. Oh, you're wrong for that. That wasn't said. Challenge me on my beliefs. And one thing I just got to make clear, me and my wife talked about this morning, like, there's an elder of one of the locations that decided to come on my page. Let me just preface this. We're not friends on Facebook. I don't follow him. I don't know that he follows me. I don't tag anybody. Very rarely. I'll tag you and some other people, but very rarely do I tag in anything. So I was led through another discussion to post about something this morning or last night. And 8 o'clock this morning, this person popped on and just started challenging me. And I have no problem with challenging. I have no problem with agreeing that I'm not going to agree with you on that. I just don't feel it's there.
Yeah.
I can still love you and respect you. It doesn't have to be a fight. It doesn't have to be an argument.
No.
My belief is my belief. But this person wants to come on and fight and argue about it. And I countered with intellectual, scriptural evidence to the point that he was speaking about. And he still came back. And my wife's like, why do you fight with these people? Did you just pick a fight with him? I was like, no, it's my page. Like, this is your podcast.
Yeah.
And I love what you said in the beginning. Look, if this is not for you, then that's fine. If you don't agree with it, it's fine. I'm not going to get into some argument with you. Your job is not to correct everybody in the world, and my job isn't either.
Yeah.
If it bothers you so bad, guess what?
Move along.
Don't follow, click, don't watch. It's too easy. Life's too short to be dealing with this. So this person just is back and forth and back and forth, and it was over the certainty of because So it's funny, if you stand up for something, all of a sudden you become pro that in this world that we live in. Like, we talk about, I had a conversation about gay, lesbian, and transgender people. And I just spoke from a spiritual standpoint, from a scriptural standpoint, and from a God standpoint of everybody that's created is God's image. It's his child. He's destined us to be like him, to come to him.
Yeah.
It's our free will and our choices that make us different.
Yeah.
And that puts the sin involved. So with that being said, I said that and I just said, we are not here to scream at gay pride parades, turn or burn, and be hateful and ugly. There is nothing that I found scripturally that's what we're supposed to do. You have two choices. If that really bothers you, stay home and pray to your Father. Get on your face, spend some time with him and go, God, change this world or change my heart. Or you can go out there and you don't have to agree with their lifestyle, but you can show the love that Christ showed even to us in the midst of our ugliness, and like hand bottles of water out to them in the 150-degree heat. And that's not saying I support them. So I started getting accused by fellow pastors like, you're pro-gay, you're heretical. And I'm like, where did I ever say I agree with people being gay?
Yeah.
It's not my decision. So the same thing about this is the separation of church and state. It's so funny. And I won't start too far on this one. Christian nationalism, right? The Christian nationalists are trying to turn America into God's country. And if you don't believe that God is the founding stepfather of America. Look, first of all, God doesn't care about America.
No.
He cares about their people because those are his children. There's scripture in Corinthians, I believe it is, where he says that he doesn't differentiate between people of different nations. He differentiates.
The same is the same, yeah.
Yeah, it's who he is. And it always goes down to John 3:16. For God so loved the world, not America.
Not Israel.
Not Israel. Not none of those.
No.
He loved the world. And we go through that. So this person's like, well, you're just pushing church and state. You must be. And he called me. This is so funny. The worst thing I ever disliked was snowflake. When we started calling younger generation people snowflake as an insult, I just lost it. I was like, the older generation, my age generation, were the ones calling the 20-something-year-olds. And I had to correct a couple of my veteran buddies. I said, you realize we created them, right? We wanted to give them what we didn't have, so we entitled them and we spoiled them. Yeah. And now we're mad at the behaviors they're giving us. So it's our job to fix that.
You created this mess.
Yeah. So, but this, I'm separation of church and state for the fundamentalist Christian nationalist it's so hypocritical that the very first amendment in the Constitution is freedom of religion.
Yeah.
It said we will not make a national religion, even though supposedly I've just got this quote from one of the pastors at that former church that these forefathers were Christians. Well, first of all, Christians in 1700s and Christians in 2024, vast majority are different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because you went to a church, Donald Trump said something the other day. He said, I'm a Christian. My dad used to take me to Billy Graham's crusades. Well, guess what? Parking your car or laying a cot in a garage doesn't make you any more a car than because you slept in a garage.
Yeah.
So I said something about church and state, and I said this is where we need to be very careful of the Christian nationalist movement, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to change things and some it's not. And this person said, well, why are you following that? And he called me a demon-crat. Not a Democrat, but demon-crat. They said, you're one of those left-wingers now. And I'm like, well, I'm a centrist. I'm an American. I bled for this country.
I'm a libertarian.
So. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, me too. I'm not. I don't go left or right. I'm just middle. And so I said, the funny story is you're missing the whole point of the discussion here. Like you just have it in your mind. So you can't argue with those people.
It's hard to argue with people because they're so set on their way they think.
Yep.
There's no. Well, let me try to understand you.
Yeah.
I had a argument with someone online back and forth for a while, for the last few days. And I kept saying, hey, are you trying to understand? Or are you just trying to ask questions in bad faith? Because here's the thing about empathy, which I think a lot of Christians and a lot of churches are missing.
Yes.
A lot of pastors are missing empathy. Empathy is the greatest gift to any leader.
Yep.
That's what makes good leaders great, is empathy. Yep. You can have title, position, whatever, but if you're great at empathy, then you're going to be an amazing leader. You can be sucky at a lot of other things,
right?
But if you're really good at that skill of empathy, because empathy is a skill, you have to develop that.
So for some of those people out there that think when you say the word meek, they automatically think weak.
No,
it's not. Meek is power under control. And empathy is not weak. Empathy is not soft-hearted. Empathy is not pushover, right? No. It's seeing all the things from all angles at one time and giving people grace. I believe empathy is buried in grace.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you have to give that grace to fully understand. And I've said this before to you and others, the truth doesn't have to be proven. People believe that you have to prove the truth to me. No. The truth is the truth. It's infinite. It's perfect. It's just like Jesus doesn't need to be accepted by all men to still be the Son of God.
Yeah.
Like I don't you can not believe in him. It doesn't change the fact that he's sitting at the hand of the creator. Yeah. So the truth is the truth. And so if I say something, you go, that's not true. My responsibility is to try to prove to you, because you've already shown me that you already don't believe me.
Yeah.
There's nothing more I'm going to say. It's concerned in a big argument. So how about this? How about you have the obligation to prove to me that the truth is not true? It's actually untrue. Show me where, and in a good heart, with empathy and grace and love, walk me through where you feel I'm wrong and help me understand.
And then also I say, bring context.
Yes.
Because I hate when people just like, you're wrong. Here's a quick little snippet from a Bible verse. Yep. And they think you're cutting you with a knife.
How about the last one of the last sermons I sent to you, where Jeremiah 5 was brought up, and it said that this pastor said that we are biblically commanded to take up politics and to control where we live, and that Jeremiah 5, there's
no, it does not say that at all.
Nothing. He was
and talking about Israel, about being when they were in exile.
Yeah.
So everything's context is everything. That's why hermeneutics is so important.
Yeah. Wait a minute, we're not exiled right now as Americans?
No, yeah.
Okay.
Americans aren't suffering. We're blessed. Even in our suffering in America, we're still more blessed than most nations.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
You're spoiled rotten if you think America, we're struggling. Yes, we're struggling more than we used to. Doesn't mean we're really struggling in the big scheme of things. Yeah. You know, and that's the thing is like people don't realize this, and you could tell when someone's never been outside the country.
Oh yeah.
Or lived outside the country.
Yes.
I've lived in Korea. I've lived in Japan. I've lived in Africa because that's living there. I was there for like 7 months in Africa. And you see real poverty. Yeah. You see real struggle. Even in Japan, like, Japan's like really modern, but people are struggling. Their culture is rough. I would not want to work in Japan. Yeah. I don't mind working there as a army soldier, but in their culture, they're working like almost 80-hour weeks and stressed, and alcoholism is really high. Suicide rate is the highest in Japan. So it's like, as bad as you think you have in America, especially in the church, you're not persecuted. The church isn't persecuted. No. It really isn't.
No, not at all.
And you look at how good we have it and what we do with that goodness. We don't utilize that to its full potential, unfortunately. Yeah. Like you said, like this whole Christian nationalist thing, it's like I see this church politics. Actually, what's funny, the pastor at the church we're attending now brought up politics, but it was short and sweet. And it was just like, it's like, hey, I believe Christians should be in politics, but guess what? God is more important than your politics. Yep. Jesus is number one. Yep. And that was like, and he kept going with the sermon. Yeah. Because you mentioned like that the world's going crazy, politics is going crazy right now.
Endorse a candidate?
No. No, he just brought it up kind of short and sweet. It's like, hey, yes, we have a part to play in this. Do what you want to do. Go vote. Go do this. Yes, absolutely. But remember this, don't let fear take over. Jesus is number one. Thank you for watching another episode of Living Fully Fit with Coach AJ. Hopefully this segment helps you in your journey, in your spiritual walk, and especially your spiritual fitness. And maybe this message isn't for you, and that's fine too. We are here to help you navigate through your life in every aspect of fitness, whether it's mental, emotional, relational, physical, and especially spiritual. And this episode is really guided and designed to help you understand ministry. Maybe ministry is for you, maybe it is not. And that's okay too. We want to help you grow and become a better version of you, regardless of your thought process and regardless if this is for you or not. But if you do enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe down below to receive new updates and new content. And make sure to select the notification bell to receive updates on this content. And if you love what you're watching here and you want to help support the channel, make sure to hit a thumbs up. And then don't forget also to share the link down below with someone you know that might benefit from content like this. But anyways, thank you for watching. And if you want to engage in the community, make sure to make a comment down below. And hopefully the comment will help benefit you and grow you to be a better version of yourself as we both navigate through spiritual fitness and growth. Thank you for watching.